The blizzard had erased the world, burying the trails and every sign of life beneath a silent white death. Inside the small log cabin, Sam Morgan had only the fire for company. He had grown used to the silence, had even found a certain comfort in it. That was why the sound was so alarming. 3 knocks on the door, faint but insistent. A sound that had no business existing on a night like this. In a world that had been erased, who could possibly be out there? And what could be more terrifying than the storm itself? The piece of wood in Sam Morgan's hand had no shape. His blade moved across the grain, not to create a form, but simply to whittle away the heavy moments of the evening. His large, calloused hands moved with a familiar rhythm, the rhythm of solitude. In this log cabin, the only sounds were the crackle of firewood in the hearth and the whistle of the wind through the cracks. It had been a long time since this place had known Abigail's laughter or the buzz of bees in the flower garden she had loved. That garden, after she was gone, had turned to weeds, then was buried by snow, and was now just a silent, empty space. He never had the courage to plant anything again. Outside, the winter night tightened its grip on the land. Snow fell not in flurries, but in great, deliberate sheets, blanketing the world in a deathly silence. Sam glanced at the fire, stoked it gently to life, then leaned back in his chair, letting out a long, weary breath. His whole body ached with a chill that crept from the marrow, the kind of cold that memory exhales, colder than any blizzard. It was a dull pain, the kind that doesn't scream, but settles in the chest like dust in old corners. He reached for his mug of black coffee, long since gone cold, and took a sip out of habit. Not thirst. Then a sound echoed, not the wind shaking branches, not a raccoon scratching at the walls. It was human. 3 knocks, hesitant and heavy. Sam stood still, every joint in his body seeming to freeze. A 4th knock, weaker, then a long pause. He walked slowly to the door, feeling every bone protest. He hadn't had a visitor in days. The path was buried under drifts of snow taller than a man. He slid the iron bolt and opened the door a crack, with all the caution of a man whom the world had taught not to expect surprises, and she was there. A woman huddled in a worn-out coat, too big for her thin frame, its hem crusted with ice. Huddled. Behind her were 3 tiny figures, shivering under a single thin blanket, their faces nothing but wide, frightened eyes. The woman's gaze met his, a look of bewilderment that still held a flicker of light that had not yet surrendered. She said nothing. She didn't have to. Sam felt the plea in her every breath, in the way her knees threatened to buckle, but somehow held. He said not a word, just silently stepped back, yielding the way. She guided the children over the threshold with stiff arms, murmuring reassurances he could not hear. Sam closed the door behind them, the click of the latch separating the cabin from the screaming night outside. They stood near the hearth, silent and dripping. The smallest, a golden-haired girl, clutched a soaking wet rag doll as if it were the only thing left in the world. Sam tossed another log into the fire. Sparks flew and light bloomed across the room, painting strokes of life onto their pale, cold faces. They were still silent. Finally, the woman's voice came, hoarse and almost a whisper. "We walked for 3 days. The wagon wheel broke east of Bitter Ridge." Sam nodded, only to show he had heard, her voice a little steadier now. "I am Rachel. These are my children, Finn, Theo, and Sadie. Are you lost?" he asked, his voice gravelly from disuse. "Left behind," she answered, a single phrase that held an entire story. Sam didn't ask for more. He just motioned toward the chairs near the fire. "Sit. Get dry. I'll fetch something hot." He returned minutes later with bowls of broth, thin and simple, but hot. The children didn't wait. They bent over their bowls, eating with the quiet urgency of those who had been tormented by hunger for too long. Rachel only watched them, not touching her own bowl. "You should eat too," Sam said. "I will," she replied, but her eyes never left her children. He watched her, not with judgment, but with the careful attention of a man who had once known what it was to be needed. Her face was gaunt with hunger, but still etched with pride. He knew then that accepting this help had cost her a great deal. The silence after the storm carried a different weight. It was no longer the silence of emptiness, but a profound stillness, as if the world were holding its breath beneath a blanket of pristine snow. The desperate footprints leading to Sam Morgan's door were now erased by sleep and warmth. Inside the cabin, the air no longer smelled only of cold ash, but now held the warmth of thin broth and the sweet scent of pine resin. Rachel was the first to wake, not to a sound, but to the vigilance that had seeped deep into the flesh of a mother. She sat up on the floor, where her thin coat had been her only pillow, and instinctively looked toward the quilt where her 3 children slept. Their breaths mingled as one, their cheeks now flushed with warmth instead of bruised with cold. She rose quietly, avoiding the creaking floorboards, and moved to the kitchen corner. Sam was already there, moving as quietly as the dawn, stirring a pot of oatmeal over a low flame. "You're awake," he said without looking up. "I tried to sleep," she replied, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. He handed her a bowl of thick oats, a warm wooden spoon already in it. She took it with both hands and sat by the window, watching the horizon slowly blush into a pale blue. "The storm has passed," Sam said, "but the trail is gone. It will be days before you can find it." "I'm not looking for it," Rachel said without looking at him. And he did not ask her to. The children woke slowly, blinking in the soft golden light. Finn yawned and crawled toward the fire without a word. Sadie, smaller and softer than her brothers, was the last to stir, her hand still clutching the tattered doll. When Sam returned from the stables, the cabin had changed. Rachel had swept the floor, laid the children's damp clothes to dry near the fire, and had even mended the frayed cuff of one of his old shirts. She hadn't asked permission. She simply acted with the care of someone who understood that restoring order was a way of holding on to oneself. "You didn't have to do that," Sam said, shrugging off his snow-caked coat. "I know," she replied, tying off her thread. "But it helped me feel like I belonged here, if only for a minute." After breakfast, Finn found an old wooden horse on the shelf. Above the mantel, a toy Sam had carved long ago, never played with, kept more as a memory. "Did you make this?" the boy asked, holding it up. Sam nodded. "It's beautiful," the boy said, inspecting it like a treasure. "Can I keep it?" "It's yours," Sam said. Finn beamed. The smile was rare and sudden, and it awakened some hidden corner. In Sam's chest, a melody he didn't know he had forgotten. That afternoon, the cabin hummed with a rhythm of life. Sam chopped more wood while Rachel boiled water to wash the little socks. Finn followed him outside, helping to stack the kindling. They worked side by side, not speaking much, but Sam noticed how quickly the boy learned, not just mimicking, but remembering. That night, as Rachel sat sewing another sock, Sam finally asked the question that had been hovering on his tongue all day. "Do you plan to leave when the trail is clear?" She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers moved with a steady rhythm. "I don't know," she said. "There's nowhere left that expects us." Sam nodded slowly. "There's work in town, Mrs. Webbett. The general store needs help in the spring. She's fond of children." Rachel looked up at him, her eyes holding not suspicion, but the weary hope of someone accustomed to doors that opened into danger. "I'm not offering charity," Sam said. "I just think this land is big enough for more than just ghosts." She didn't smile, but something in her eyes shifted, like ice beginning to melt at the edge of a long winter. That night, the wind outside no longer howled, it whispered. The children curled up again under the quilts. Rachel helped Sam wash the dishes, their hands brushing in the water, rough, calloused, and full of untold stories. After everything was quiet, Sam sat by the fire, the piece of wood in his hands now beginning to resemble a fox, lively and watchful. He hadn't intended to carve it into that shape, but some things form themselves over time. Rachel stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, watching the night sky. "There is peace here," she said softly. "But it's the kind you have to earn, not borrow." Sam didn't answer. He didn't have to. She already knew he agreed. When she turned, he offered her the chair by the fire. She took it. The silence returned, but this time it was not empty. It was full of possibility, a cradle of warmth they had built together in a single day to hold against the cold that had once swallowed them both. And somewhere beyond the snow and the past, a new rhythm waited, one neither of them had expected, one worth staying to learn. Spring did not arrive with a trumpet blast, but in a series of small sighs as the frost slowly released its grip. The snow softened first near the well and along the eaves, where icicles wept themselves into clear puddles. Sam noticed it in the way the door no longer stuck, and in the wind, once fierce and full of sorrow, which now carried the scent of wet bark and distant mud. Trust, like spring, does not arrive with fanfare. It arrives with patience. Inside the cabin, the shift echoed even louder. Sam had begun to carve again, not just from habit or loneliness, but for the children. Finn, especially, was mesmerized by the craft. He would sit on a stool beside him with his own dull blade and a scrap of wood, mimicking the motions with the focus of one who understood the act was sacred. "That one looks like a rabbit," Finn said one morning, peering over Sam's shoulder as shavings curled onto the floor like feathers. "It's supposed to be," Sam murmured. "Do you make them all from memory?" "Some, others come from nothing. Just hands remembering something the mind has forgotten." Finn blinked, as if trying to understand how hands could hold memories. Rachel had begun to change too, though her shifts were quieter than the land's. She still moved like someone expecting the floor to collapse beneath her, but cracks had appeared in her armor of caution. Moments when her smile arrived without resistance, or when her eyes lingered on Sam a moment longer. She had taken over the cooking, and though the meals were simple, they held a warmth that could only come from someone who put thought into the simplest things. One morning, Sadie wandered into the small shed behind the barn where Sam worked. She didn't speak, just climbed onto the bench beside him and watched as he shaped a block of wood into delicate wings. "Is it for me?" she asked softly. "If you want it." She nodded solemnly. "It's beautiful. Do you know what butterflies mean?" Sam asked, pausing his work. She shook her head. "They mean change. From something that crawls to something that flies." Sadie stared at the carving, then at him. "Mama says we changed. She says we were scared worms, and now we're a family." Sam smiled. "That sounds about right." As April pushed in with its thaw and wildflowers, the cabin took on a new kind of warmth, one that couldn't be blamed on firewood. The children no longer called Sam Mister, but simply Sam. Once, Finn slipped and called him Papa, then froze, his cheeks turning red, an apology on his lips. Sam said nothing, just reached out and rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. Finn beamed and did not correct himself. One afternoon, while the children were playing outside and Sadie was napping on the porch, Rachel and Sam were alone in the kitchen. She was kneading dough, sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back with a strip of cloth. He was fixing a hinge on the pantry door, watching her more than his task. "Never figured you for a bread maker," he said. "Neither did I," she replied. "But I learned, the way women do when they're waiting for someone to come back and don't know if they will." Sam tightened the screw. "He was gone long before you left." Her hands didn't stop. "He was gone long before I admitted it. He was one of those men who only love you when you need nothing from them." Sam nodded. There are a lot of those men." She glanced at him, and an understanding, aged and earned, passed between them. "Do you ever wish you had left instead of staying?" she asked, her voice quieter. He met her eyes. "Sometimes. But I would have carried her absence either way. At least here, I know the weight of it." She looked down, pressing her palm into the cup. "Doe, grief is strange. You think it will hollow you out, but instead it fills you. It makes a room inside you that you never planned to furnish. And when someone walks into that room," Sam finished for her, "you're not sure if you should. Ask them to stay." Rachel gave a small smile, sad but genuine. Exactly that. They didn't speak again after that. The silence between them had shifted, no longer an absence, but an invitation. And then, late one afternoon, as the honey-colored sun stretched across, the hills and the air was so still you could hear the new grass growing, they saw it. From the southern trail, a thin trace of dust rose like a warning, a tear in the fabric of the clear blue sky. A single rider, no wagon, no gear. Just a man, on a dark horse, cutting across the land as if it owed him something. The peace was broken. The wind, which had carried only the scent of damp earth and new buds, now carried the taste of dust. The trace of dust in the south was no longer a distant warning. It had taken the shape of a man on a horse, and he was heading straight for them. The children's laughter died out. They ran to the porch, huddling together, their carefree games ending abruptly. Sam stepped out of the shed, not hurrying, but every step carried weight. His body formed a silent wall between the stranger and the porch, where the life he had just rediscovered was now shrinking in fear. Rachel appeared at the door, a damp cloth in her hand. She stood motionless the moment she saw the rider. The color drained from her face. She knew this man. The man reined his horse in near the fence and dismounted with a practiced grace. He was tall and angular, covered in a layer of road dust, yet his leather boots were polished. A smile played on his lips, but it did not reach his eyes. "Rachel," he said, his voice artificially smooth. "Well, isn't this a sweet picture?" She did not answer. "It was a long ride," he continued, leaning against the fence. "Heard a rumor you were here. Took me a few towns to find the right whisper, but I suppose you weren't trying too hard to hide." Sam stepped forward, his voice even. "Who are you?" The man turned to him, looking him up and down with an appraising air. "Randall Byrne, husband and father, depending on the day." Rachel's jaw tightened. She didn't retreat, didn't even blink. "You're not welcome here," Sam said, his voice calm but final. Randall let out a soft chuckle. "I believe I still have a say in the matter. Those are my children, are they not? Seems you've been keeping them from their rightful family." "You left us to die," Rachel said, her voice as clear and cold as ice. "You turned your back when we needed a roof, a meal." "It was a mistake," he said, holding his hands up in a mock surrender. "What man doesn't make them? But they are still mine by law." "No court recognizes abandonment as a claim to kinship," Sam said. Randall stared at him, his lips twisting into a sneer that had likely charmed barmaids and card players. "And who are you? Her lawyer, or just the poor fool she latched?" On to next, Sam didn't answer. He didn't have to. Rachel had stepped up to stand beside him, her voice low but firm. "What do you want?" "The children, my rights. You can stay if you want, but they are coming with me. And I'll be taking them tomorrow." The children watched from behind the porch rail, their eyes wide with confusion. Sadie clutched the Abigail doll to her chest like a lifeline. "You can't just take them," Rachel said. Randall's expression hardened. "I can and I will. Don't make me bring the sheriff into this." He swung himself onto his horse, not in haste, but with the swagger of a man used to getting what he demanded. "Your little fairy tale is over. It's time to wake up." He rode off without a backward glance. The dust cloud swallowed his figure, but his words hung in the air like toxic smoke. That evening, a silence fell upon the cabin, heavy and suffocating. The children asked no questions. They had learned when to be quiet. Rachel paced the kitchen, her steps methodical, but her hands shook as she folded towels that didn't need folding. Sam sat at the table, sharpening his knife purely out of habit. "He can't take them," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But he will try," Sam replied. "He'll bring papers or worse. He knows the kind of men who wield words like weapons." Her breath hitched. "I will not marry again just to protect my children. I will not trade one prison for another." "You won't have to." She looked at him, her eyes fierce beneath their fear. "Even if you are a good man, Sam, even if I trust you, that is still not freedom." "I am not offering a bond," he said. "I am only offering to stand there in front of him with you. If need be." She sat down across from him, her hands twisting in her lap. "I thought we were safe. You were. You are. But ghosts don't knock. They let themselves in." The next day, Randall returned. This time he was not alone. A man rode beside him, wearing a star pinned to his vest and a frown too neat to be genuine concern. This was Sheriff Malloy from the next town over, known to some as the law and to others as an office that could be bought. They dismounted without ceremony. The sheriff stepped forward, a document in his hand. "Ma'am, I have been informed that you have been keeping these children from their father. According to this petition, signed and sworn by Mr. Byrne here, the children are to be returned to his temporary custody while the courts sort out the rest." Rachel stepped onto the porch, her voice calm but trembling at the edges. "He abandoned. U.S., I have witnesses. He left us to die in the snow. Do you have proof of that?" Sam stepped up beside her. "You have half the town who saw her walk out of that storm with nothing but willpower. She has worked. She has built a life here. Those children are alive because of her." The sheriff glanced at Randall, then at the cabin, then back at the paper. "That may be, but a judge will decide. Until then, the children go with their father." Rachel's knees buckled slightly. Sam reached out a hand, steadying her. She didn't lean into him, but she didn't pull away. Then a voice rose from behind them. Clear and strong. Mrs. Webb, the general store owner, had arrived in her wagon, snow still clinging to the hem of her dress. "That man is no father," she said loudly. "He's a drifter and a liar. Ask around town. Ask Doc Hadley. Ask anyone who watched this woman raise those children with grace while he rode off in search of a bottle." More voices followed. Doc Hadley, Pastor Elias, even young Ben Miller from the stables. They came not with weapons or shouts, but with presence, with truth. The sheriff, caught between paper and people, scratched his head. "You'll have to take this to the courthouse, Mr. Byrne," he said. "I won't be dragging children away when half the town stands against it." Randall looked as if he might spit fire, but he swallowed it down, leaving only a sneer. "Fine, but this isn't over." He rode off again, slower this time. The sheriff followed, grumbling something about judges and jurisdiction. The townspeople stayed a while longer. They didn't celebrate. They simply stood close, offering quiet nods of comfort. Rachel thanked them, her voice breaking. Sam watched her, steady and silent, his heart swelling with something he didn't dare name. That night, Rachel stood by the fire, her arms wrapped around herself. "He'll be back," she said. "With more papers, with stronger words." Sam nodded. "Then, we will be stronger still." She looked at him, no longer as a frightened woman, but as someone measuring the shape of hope against memory. "I was going to leave when spring came. Take the children somewhere new, somewhere without ghosts. You still can." She stepped closer. "But maybe it's not the ghosts that haunt me. Maybe it's the fear that nothing lasts." Sam reached into a drawer and pulled out something small. A wooden ring, simple and unadorned, but carved with great care. "I made this," he said, before the snow melted. I didn't know if I would give it to you. He paused. It's not a proposal. It is just proof that I believe in something lasting. She took it slowly, holding it in her palm like a fragile bird. Thank you, she whispered. The fire crackled behind them. The children slept soundly in the next room. The wind outside carried the scent of earth, of ash, and of promise. And though the road ahead still held a fight and uncertainty, a choice had been made. Not out of desperation, but out of quiet defiance. Out of a love not yet spoken, but clearly seen. The storm had returned, but this time, they would not face it alone. They came to town as a family. Not declared, not defined by blood, but by choice. The courtroom was small, but the pews were full. Mrs. Webb, Doc Hadley, and the pastor. Half the town had come, not for spectacle, but to stand for the truth. Randall wore his finest coat, but it could not hide the hollowness behind his words. His arguments had structure, but no soul. Rachel spoke only once, her voice quiet, but clear. I would rather live in poverty, live in silence, live alone with my children in a place that sees them, than let them go with a man who only sees his own reflection in their eyes. Sam took the stand after her. I was lost when I found them, he said, his voice not directed at the judge, but as if to the room itself. Not because I needed saving, but because I had no one left to give to. Then they came, hungry, cold, and brave. And every day since, they have reminded me what it means to be alive. The judge listened, long and hard. Then he gave his ruling. Custody granted to Rachel Byrne, full and permanent. Randall's claim was dismissed, with no right for further appeal. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Sam waited as Rachel hugged each child tightly, kissing their foreheads, one by one. Then she turned to him. The sun had broken through the clouds. Warm light spilling over the steps. A breeze carried the scent of dust and lilac. She reached into her pocket and held out the wooden ring. I have carried this since the night you gave it to me, she said. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be offered something, without conditions. He looked at her steady. You don't owe me anything. I know, she said. But I would like to offer you something too. She took his hand. I would like to stay. Not just through the next storm, not just to raise these children, but because when I look at you, I don't see a rescue. I see a home. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He only pulled her close, and she let him. That night, they sat by the hearth. The fire was bright. The cradle stood between them, rocking gently with a touch of wind from the open window. Sadie slept on the rug. Finn and Theo dozed against the far wall, their arms tangled, their breaths even. Outside, the last of the snow melted into the earth. Inside, a true love, worn and rooted, grew without need for ceremony. And if you listen closely, even now you might hear it. Not thunder, not a storm. Just the whisper of warmth against wood. The soft breath of a miracle born not in fire, but in kindness. And the creak of a cradle swaying in time with the beat of a heart that had found its way home.